Thank you, Louise. Thank you to the Academy for inviting me to join this incredible meeting of kindred spirits from throughout the world. How many of you traveled more than 50 miles to get here? More than 500 miles? More than 5,000 miles? How many of you are still traveling? But thank you, Louise, for your incredible look beneath the surface, for making the invisible visible and encouraging us to tell our stories, which is a theme I'm going to develop and continue with and kind of look beneath the surface. But I want to say in advance, what I'm not going to be doing is trying to bring you all over to the human side of healthcare. You're already profoundly, firmly on the human side of healthcare, on the patient-centered side, on the person-centered side, on the whole person care side, on the biopsychosocial plus spiritual side of healthcare. You almost define it. So that's not my charge. My charge is more to look at how we can survive and thrive on the human side of healthcare. And I think that's a really important question, because doing person-centered medicine requires more of you. Whole person care requires your whole person. It means being fully present to suffering. It means having those difficult end-of-life conversations, the transitional conversations from curative to palliative goals of care. I always think of Avery Weissman's dictum, candor with hope, as a guiding kind of frame. It means being a team member. Now that's a lot of fun for us independent people who have to work interdependently, isn't it? Belmont wrote once, if you don't have scars, when they don't have scars, they haven't been on a team. So we have to be vulnerable and to be part of an interdisciplinary team. It requires being open, and as Louise is advising us, to share our stories more. And I'm going to talk a little later about helper secrets and some of the things that are very difficult to talk about, that we don't talk about. It means integrating and transforming loss in your everyday work as you help people integrate and transform loss in their lives, our patients and families. There's a survey of end-of-life workers, and number one stressor was workload, which we can all understand. But the number two was we don't have time to grieve our losses. Isn't it interesting that we just don't have time? I think we need to make that time and find ways to do that. Also interesting, 80% of the respondents said that the real problem is the workload compromises the quality of care, which I think really rings true for everyone in this room. It means maintaining and renewing your commitment to this work. And I think that's just such an important thing. And I want to talk about these challenges. I want to begin by talking actually about our stories. As we think about how we can meet what I call the challenge of caring, which I think is the fundamental challenge in end-of-life work, which is how to take your empathy, how to maintain your empathy and your compassion while you courageously assist people, and I think it is a courageous act, to live with hope in a world in which loss is inescapable. I think that's our charge. And so to understand that kind of challenge, I want to begin by asking you to think about what brought you in. How did you end up in this room today? How did you decide to do palliative care? Maybe it's when you decided to do medicine originally, or social work, or nursing. But how did you make the decision that resulted in you being in this room? Just go back, do some inner Googling. I am from Silicon Valley. And think about, how did I get here? What was I wanting to achieve? What were my goals? What were my expectations? What were my hopes? Was it making a difference, meeting unmet needs that you saw existing in healthcare? What was it that brought you into this room? Was it a loss for some of us? This is a photo of me with my brother. Just before he died, I was age 5. I know that was very important in terms of bringing me into the work. My family never mentioned his name for the next 30 years. Yet I found myself going around the country and I'd always add, help the Sibs grieve. What I was really saying was, help this Sib grieve. How many of us had a loss in our lives that was influential in bringing us into the work. You can really identify. You can see our losses deepened our empathy. We're not just wounded healers. Our losses deepen our empathy. So, despite everything, I want to ask you to do a little existential kind of thing here. I'd like you to think, would I do it again? And I'd like everyone, just reflect. And don't do it for your supervisor or your boss or, you know, your neighbor there. Would you choose to do this work again? And I'd like everyone to stand up. And don't worry if you don't stand up. That's fine. You may be feeling like, I don't know if this is the right thing for me. But if you would do it again, if you would choose this work again, stand up. Everyone stand up. Look at this. Wow. Boy, thank you. That's inspiring. Sit down. Are you sure about that? Okay. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Whew. Okay. So commitment and recommitting are very important. You can't disengage. Disengage causes burnout. Disengagement from the work. This is one of the interesting findings. You know, I want to show you something, and we'll just use a little test that I have. Answer these items using this Likert scale from 1 is strongly disagree to 5 is strongly agree. When I'm reading an interesting story or novel, I imagine how I would feel if the events in the story were happening to me. Just give yourself a rating. This is an empathic capacity test. After acting in a play myself or seeing a play or movie, I have felt partly as though I were one of the characters. When I watch a good movie, I can very easily put myself in the place of a leading character. So answer those items for yourself and add up your scores. How many of you scored 8 or above? Okay, 9 or above, 10 or above, 11 or above, 12, we're like one standard deviation out, 13, 14, do we have any 15s? Okay, I have some good news and I have some bad news. In a study by Ezra Stotland, nurses who scored the highest on these very items were the first to leave the rooms of dying patients. They did the proverbial U-turn at the foot of the bed of the dying patient. Why? Because they were beginning nurses. They didn't know how to communicate that empathy. They didn't know what to do with it. They were overwhelmed when they came into that room. But later on, when they received supervision and training and learned communication skills to communicate the empathy, they became the most effective nurses as judged by researchers, coworkers, and patients. So your empathy is a double-edged sword. Similarly, what brought you into the work is a double-edged sword. It's going to define what matters to you. When things don't go well, if you're highly motivated, it's what defines your stress. Francis Bacon, Tower of London, 1603, to love is to give hostages to fortune. When you love something, that really matters to you, when it's threatened or lost, you have stress. This was Dick Lazarus, my teacher at Berkeley's basic stress model. So, our empathy and our helping motivations are double-edged swords. We are always moving back and forth on a continuum of emotional involvement. The left side of this slide is for some reason not showing. But that's okay, that's the burnout side. It was there earlier. So let's not talk about burnout. Anyhow. We're always moving back. Imagine on the left side of the slide is a burnout, and the burnout's very familiar to all of us. How many of us are members of the formerly burned out club? We've come back, right? Burnout is actually, you can think of it as a badge of honor. You had to be on fire to really burn out, didn't you? But we're always moving back and forth on this continuum of emotional involvement, from being on fire, too close, overly involved, to burnout, which we know has the hallmark characteristics of, as Chris Maslach researched it, demoralization, the sense of I'm not doing well at doing good, so it goes back to our goals. We're not really being successful, and we're not finding the meaning that got us into this work. That's what brought us in. Ayala Pines, a dear friend of mine who died recently from an aggressive cancer, who was one of the foremost burnout researchers, she said that burnout is fundamentally a failure in the quest for meaning. How she defined it. And then we have diminished caring, those days when you wake up and you're not having that special caring feeling. You know, we have the We Care or hospice cares or on your bumper, but when you get to that house, you're feeling like, it's not happening for me. I'm not having that special caring feeling. We've all had those days, haven't we? So we're pulling back a little bit. We're emotionally disengaging. And then finally you have, which is, at the heart of burnout, is the exhaustion, the physical, emotional, psychological exhaustion resulting from long-term involvement with people in stressful situations, which is actually a definition of burnout. So we are always moving back and forth, but we've got to find a way to be in that center balanced position. I find it's, I'd like to, there it is, to think about this metaphor of the helper's pit. So you're on the top of the pit, and the people we are helping, patients and families, are in distress, are down in the pit. So how do we find a way to reach into the pit without falling into the pit ourselves? People in pits do not need their helpers in the pit with them. And there are different kinds of emotional involvement we can have. We can have sympathy for people who are down in the pit, which is feeling for them. We can have empathy for them, which is feeling with them, which is more what we need to really do if we're going to do person-centered medicine. How do we keep ourselves from falling into the pit? We have to hold on to our communication skills, our support from team members, our exercise. We have to have a balanced kind of stance. We have to practice self-care. Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF told me recently that they found that doing a mindfulness intervention with folks actually lengthen their telomeres. Those are the nucleoproteins on the tips of your chromosomes that prevent replicative senescence and that are associated with all the diseases of aging and with cancer. You want to have long telomeres. And so just mindfulness intervention also allows you to maybe become more present in the moment as you reach into that pit. But countertransference can put us in the pit. A lot of things can put us into that pit and cause problems for us. But there have been different ways to describe the stance and what happens if we lose our balance. That happens. We're in the pit. People have described different ways that different stances that we can have toward the distress of people in the pit. And it's been described variously as detached concern or exquisite empathy. But I like Carl Rogers' description the most. And Carl said that empathy is sensing the other person's feelings and experiences as if they were your own, but without losing the as-if quality. When you lose the as-if quality, you fall into the pit. So we need to have balanced empathy. And we also need to have realistic views of ourselves and of the helping that we're doing. And there have been a lot of folks who have influenced us, folks, icons, and stories. And I want to talk about those stories for a moment. We had Einstein who said, "Only a life lived for others is worthwhile." Now that's inspiring, isn't it? But would I really describe my life that way? It's being lived for others. There's parts of it, but it's not every day when I wake up. I'm thinking about how can I get through my day. Schweitzer said, "It is only giving that stimulates. Impart as much as you can of your spiritual being to those who are on the road with you, and accept as something precious what comes back to you from them." You know, study after study in psychology demonstrates that altruism enhances well-being. Helping others lights up the same part of the brain as receiving awards and experiencing pleasure. And chocolate lovers will like to know that it also is the same part of the brain that lights up when you eat chocolate. Schweitzer also said, if we lose our reverence for any part of life, we lose it for all of life. Yet here he is choking this fawn. Martin Luther King said, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? When I wake up in the morning, I'm usually thinking, how can I get out to my car and deal with everything I'm struggling with? Mother Teresa, there is joy in transcending self to serve others. Compassion is beneficial to human survival. The Dalai Lama visited my campus a few weeks ago, and he said it's essential. When we help someone, we participate in a process finely tuned over millions of years to ensure that when we help others, we also help ourselves. There was a study at Harvard, David McClellan did, where he looked at undergraduates watching films of Mother Teresa caring for the poor. Just watching Mother Teresa caring for the poor enhanced their immune functioning. Just observing her caring for the poor in a film. Gandhi is another person that we often can compare ourselves to, usually unfavorably. How many of you are feeling guilty already? That's the point of this, is they inspire us, but they drive us a little crazy. He said, and this was great stress management advice, actually. He said, whatever you do may seem insignificant, but it's very important that you do it. That's really important to remember that. You know, a little bit of help is a lot of help. That one phone call makes a huge difference for people. How many of you have experienced that? You were beating yourself up and you thought, I didn't do enough, and you discovered that that one thing you did really, really made a difference. Then we have some other more problematic stories in our culture. The superheroes, Batman, Superman, and the Lone Ranger. And if you think about them, it's very interesting. First of all, they were all wounded healers. Their helping journeys all were launched with a trauma, right? Batman's family was killed in the alleyway. Superman lost his entire planet and family. Did anybody have a planetary loss support group in your program? No. And Lone Ranger, which dates me, I know, but recently there was a film for, you know, contemporary folks. But the Lone Ranger lost his brother in that bushwhack, if you remember in the initial episode. So, you know, they were all wounded healers, not in Henry Nouwen's more positive sense, but they were distress-driven helpers. They were also anonymous, and one thing we know in person-centered medicine, you can't be anonymous. You have to be authentic. It's not about sharing your personal life, that kind of openness. It's more about being there in the moment, authentic, without a mask. People want real people caring for them. They had superpowers. Do you have superpowers? I know some of you were thinking about it. You don't have superpowers. I feel like I have to have superpowers, but I don't. They were invulnerable. Are you invulnerable? Definitely not. Don't go there. You're not invulnerable. You're vulnerable. Human beings working with other human beings in very tough situations. They had miserable personal lives. All of them. All those superheroes. Do you have to have a miserable personal life to do a hospice and palliative care? You know, it helps, right? No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. They were also one-way caregivers. You remember at the end of each of the episodes, who was that masked man? It would always say, who was that man? Who was that hospice nurse? You know, who was? You know, they would take off and they couldn't even accept a thank you. We'll accept thank yous from patients and families. They want to say thank you to you. They love you. They may not ever want to see you again. But don't you hate that sometimes? And then the clincher is they were always successful. These superheroes were always successful, every episode. Are we always successful? No, you can't be. You can't be, you know? You just can't be always successful. So they were bad role models for us. There are some other bad role models that I grew up with, and now I'll really date myself, but some of you might remember this. Man, woman, earth, death, infinity. Ben Casey. So for those of you who weren't around then or never saw Ben Casey, I want to share one excerpt from the Light Up the Dark Corners episode in 1963, which tells us where palliative care was not in 1963. It was a program with a physician, and it was Ben Casey, Vince Edwards with Sam Jaffe, who is this Einstein-like mentor to him. Casey, they're treating a patient who has stage 4 glioblastoma, and they're debating whether to tell him about this. You know, should we tell him? Casey's struggling with this, and he says, how can I tell him, doctor? He's asking his mentor. How can I send him into that kind of hell? Jaffe, you don't. Cassidy, this is the patient who's this wealthy guy with a yacht and everything, breathes life deeply. And it will take the savor out of each breath if he knew he might die with the next. You can give him peace. Casey's struggling with this still. That's not enough. Jaffe, but it's better than nothing. End of conversation. Nothing is what was happening in 1963 in the models that we had on TV and that a lot of us grew up with and we were experiencing. Also, the story had an incredible boundary violation where the nurse at the end decides that she will say yes to the patient's overture to marry him, and she runs off with the guy to the yacht. For some of you, that doesn't sound too bad, right? But they still hadn't told him about the glioblastoma. So when we have all these experiences that, you know, kind of we struggle with. We're having unrealistic expectations of ourselves. We're getting in over our head with our involvement with patients, and we're doubting ourselves. We end up having what I call helper secrets. And the helper secrets are, you know, one variation on secrets in general. I study secrets. I'm looking at secrets at the end of life, the secrets of patients, the things that aren't shared that we encounter in our clinical work. But for us as helpers, we have quite a few things that are very difficult to talk about when we're sharing our stories. You know, my studies of secrets, I have a scale, the self-concealment scale. You can look at Wikipedia and search for self-concealment. You'll get linked up to my research website. There are 140 studies looking at the relationship between secret keeping and health issues. Even pain is a recent study, which is quite amazing. But there are, let me say this at the outset, there are secrets that we possess and other secrets that possess us. And privacy and secrecy aren't the same. So how many of you, let's say we fold or crumple our toilet paper, how many of you fold your toilet paper? Raise your hands. How many of you crumple it? Okay. How many of you are saying, I don't want to raise my hand about this at all, because it's a private issue, I don't want to go there. But even with a stupid question or issue like that, you see the shame issue starts coming in, like, what about my neighbors? Is folding better than crumpling? Which, you know, I'm a more organized person, I should fold, you know. The crumpling, maybe that's disorganized, but maybe it's creative, maybe, you know, anyhow. There's always a thought, and when we talk about is it really going to be positively perceived by others, and this is what's happening every day with our patients interacting with us and us interacting with each other, the distress disclosure dilemma. And when we're talking about, I'm talking about distressing experiences. When we have distress, we have the urge to disclose, but then if we have also this restriction, this constraint, that's what causes problems. That's when we have problems. And when I've looked at, you know, thousands of helper secrets, and you do content analyses, and you find that there are themes that recur over and over again, the same ones that I've heard leading support groups for oncology and hospice. Feelings of inadequacy, frustration with one-way giving, too many demands, anger at patients or family members, don't want to talk about that, it's not okay, emotional distancing, feeling like an imposter, less frequent or medical errors, which are very real phenomena and very painful, boundary violations, other disturbing experiences, and all these are maintained by the fallacy of uniqueness or pluralistic ignorance, the belief that nobody else is having these experiences. So when we don't share them, we don't learn that others are actually having these experiences. Here's some examples. The distress avoidance kind of guilt sequence that I've found. I have distanced myself deliberately from some patients and families as a form of self-protection when I felt emotionally overloaded, even though I felt they needed emotional support themselves. How many can really say that we've done that at some point in time? You've noticed that you've pulled back and then you felt guilty about it. Okay. Concern about others' competence, you know, about our competence and effectiveness. My inadequacy is my most personal secret. It's very frustrating to be constantly in the company of so many talented, capable people. One of the things, personality characteristics of all of us is we're more perfectionistic. That's been found. And, you know, when you're at a conference like this with the creme de la creme from all over the world, it's easy, isn't it, to compare yourself and say, oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, what is Nessa doing? Oh, my God, I'm not doing that yet. And you beat yourself up. How many of you have felt that a little bit here? It's like, oh, I didn't read that journal article, I'm sorry. You know, you have the imposter experience. I'm afraid that if anyone found out how much I don't know, I'd head for the door. Remember, this is a secret that someone shared that they did not want to say openly. I remember when I was at St. Christopher's, and I asked, has anybody ever had this experience? And more than half the people raised their hand. And I said, gosh, if they're feeling this at St. Christopher's, what about us? You know, back here. Anger. I hated the husband of a patient because he wanted her to die and did not want to care for her or be with her. I couldn't be totally effective because of my antipathy. He was selfish and I didn't help him through the crisis as I should have. How many of us have had anger at a patient or family member at some time? Okay, I think the rest of you are asleep or texting. I had a family member, and this isn't because we aren't professional, it's just, family members do some incredible things, don't they? I had a family member point to a drawer next to my beloved patient's bed and say, I know what I do, if I was her, and I opened the drawer. What is in the drawer? A revolver. And my patient started crying. And I nearly hit the man. I just had to leave the room. I couldn't go back in the room. I was so angry. And then did I talk about that? Not for a long time. I thought I was not being professional. I had a difficult patient who became angry at my attempts to help her. She spit in my face. Without thinking, I spit back in her face. But here's the, we probably haven't spit in anyone's face. But here's the painful part of this. I could have died with shame. I was there to make this more comfortable for her, and I failed miserably. I don't think anyone else would have reacted so impulsively. But how many of us, if I had followed you around, all of you incredible professionals, I have highest esteem, but how many of us have, quote unquote, said the wrong thing at some point? Raise our hands. Look around the room. We'll normalize this, okay? Here, we have said the wrong thing. And again, if you didn't raise your hand, you probably just didn't realize you said the wrong thing. Which is more scary, but Sometimes I'm so angry at a patient who's very demanding, wanting something every 5 minutes, putting the call light on excessively, then I feel guilty because they are the ones who are suffering and dying, and I'm the fortunate one. I'm healthy and able to go on with my life, and I say to myself, how could you be so uncaring and selfish? You should be doing something else, like working at Kmart. Once I was leading a retreat for a hospice of Fresno, and I developed this top 10 signs of burnout, a la David Letterman. Number 10 is shopping at Kmart feels like you're taking good care of yourself. Number 9, patients frequently startle you by waking you up during home visits. Number 8, you find yourself saying, you think you've got problems, lady? You become aware of a reluctance to go to work and you don't go to work. That's actually a burnout item. Number 6, you accidentally drop your beeper from a high bridge. Number 5, you jump after the beeper. Number 4, giggling anxiously during team meetings. Number 3, not giggling during team meetings. Number 2, eating an entire bag of Dorito chips while returning patients' phone calls. I've done that. And number 1, who cares about this list anyway? I think he throws it away like that. Yeah. Yeah, So what are the antidotes to helper secrets? Maybe it's telling our stories. It's Schwartz rounds where we're disclosing more of our own experience. Narrative kind of approach that Louise is recommending. Strengthen your support system. You've all heard this a million times, but we don't, and from a psych studies, we see that we do not avail ourselves of the support that is actually around us, that is available. And it's a little bit, like the story you've heard maybe from your spiritual care people of the guy who's in the house, it's flooding, and he gets up on the roof and a rescue boat comes and he stays, I'm putting my faith in the Lord, and then another rescue boat, I'm putting my faith in the Lord, a helicopter comes, they drop a rope ladder, he says, no, I'm staying, I'm putting my faith in the Lord, he's washed into the water, he's drowned, and he is at the pearly gates, and he says, he's miffed, he says, look what happened to me, I put my faith in the Lord and I drowned. And the booming voice says, I don't know what you're complaining about. We sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. You've all heard that, but the point here is that we don't avail ourselves of the support that's right there for us. So look around this room, this incredible room filled with the best support group you could possibly have from all over the world. Talk about our experiences, not just the difficult ones, the joys and the sorrows, the struggles. These are the folks who have empathy. You can't get all your social support needs met at home. It's not really, it's barking up the wrong tree. We have had some good role models, and this is team secrets also are a big phenomenon. And maybe another thing to think about as we're thinking about antidotes to secrets is Pandora's box and the myth, the Greek myth of Pandora. Because what was left in that box after all the Furies had escaped? Does anyone know? Hope. Yes, very learned audience. So, hope. So, if you think about yourself in terms of relating to your own difficult experiences, and I think, we have to be friendly, and one of the things I learned from Carl Rogers is be friendly to all of our experiences. There's no bad experience. Be friendly to it all. It tells us what we need to do. And, in Pandora's myth, once all the Furies had escaped, if you think about that as a metaphor, if they were met with caring, empathy, and support. So think about your own inner distress, the distress of patients and families, team issues, family issues. If that distress is met with caring, empathy, support, and love, Then hope can emerge triumphant and have her day and replace avoidance, fear, and denial. We have some better role models, thank God. We had, back in 1980, a conference on the human dimension in healthcare as a tribute to Carl Rogers. I think Carl should always be cited whenever we're listing the founders of person-centered medicine, though he's not thoroughly identified with medicine. His contribution was really to person-centered, all person-centered approaches. And I think at that conference, it was so amazing. His son, David, who's a very distinguished physician, was talking about Carl. He was also president of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at that point in time. He said that the thing about Carl was that he was not afraid of anything in human experience. Carl also said, he was age 78, he said, I'm still learning to listen at age 78. So I think that's something for all of us to remember. But if we think about Carl, and that's 4/5 of my present me on the right, and Dame Cicely, what did they teach us? Well, you know, the mantras that I remember are be yourself, respect the individual, listen to the patient. You have the scalpel and prescription pad, but you are the real instrument of healing. I want to come back to our commitments, and I want to talk just for a few moments about the bigger story you and this conference are all part of. In 1968, I was an undergraduate at the University of Chicago, and I would walk down the hall and see a sign on a seminar room, Death and Dying seminar with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. This is before the On Death and Dying book came out. And you know, as I've reflected many times on Elizabeth's contribution, it wasn't the stage theory. The stage theory was, these aren't real stages, I won't go into that, but I think it was this message and one passage from her book. It might be helpful if more people would talk about death and dying as an intrinsic part of life, just as they do not hesitate to mention when someone is expecting a baby. If this were done, we would not have to ask ourselves if we ought to bring this topic up with a patient. I think those were the most important words in that book and the conversations she modeled. We haven't arrived at Lamaze for end of life yet. In 2001, we did a newspaper series. I was senior editor, a contributing author. Ira Byock, Russ Portnoy, Joanne Hilden, Marshall Latanzi Lick, just fantastic people, Don Schumacher, Dan Tobin, all contributed stories about patients and families. And these stories were meant to provide positive role models for society. So this newspaper series reached 7 million Americans every week for 15 weeks. They got in their newspapers, the Philadelphia Inquirer and other newspapers, a chance to read about people who were doing better with these terrible situations. So we were trying to enhance our collective efficacy through social modeling, to say, here's someone who has a dying child, here's how she dealt with it. Not to say it's glamorous or anything else, just to say these are realities, and to try to get the idea across that there are better and less good ways of dying, that we can have some control over this. So we tried to raise our collective efficacy in dealing with these situations. And if the newspaper series hadn't come out 2 days after 9/11, I think more of us would have been aware of it, but it did reach 7 million Americans. You know, just a couple of months ago, Steve Connor, the World Health Palliative Care Alliance, and WHO produced this phenomenal global atlas of palliative care at the end of life, estimating that 16,000 hospice or palliative care teams now exist worldwide, serving about 3 million patients and their families annually. Isn't that amazing? Let's hear it for that, huh? So professionals throughout the world are standing up, just as you stood up. But only about 7% of the need is being met. So if we look at this map, the red zones are the areas where there's no activity, no known activity. So get thee to a red zone, or in your own zone, increase the amount of palliative care that's being offered. You know, I remember once at St. Christopher's, Dame Cicely learned that a new hospice program had begun. I'm sure some of the others in the room have had this experience there. And she ran over to this World Atlas she had and stuck a pin, push pin, in the Atlas to celebrate the single hospice program. And it was so exciting to see her, just see her joy. Like, there's a new program. She knew what it meant. And I think we've got to feel that same way and to appreciate, you know, the significance. You're all pioneers in palliative care. You might not think of yourself that way, but I'm telling you, 100 years from now, those who follow you will. It takes courage to do this work with your heart and soul, and to know that your heart is your real credential. You must feel courageous, and you must be patient, you know, and your patient must feel safe. So you feel courageous, patient feels safe. And when your empathy and helping motivations intersect with the core needs and final wishes of patients and family members, moments like these that I want to share with you affirm the meaning your work has for you and the people you serve. Here's what someone shared with me. A young wife and mother died 2 days before Christmas. Her husband was grief-stricken but coping well. Before he allowed his children to come in and say goodbye to their mother, I helped him dress her in a beautiful robe, comb out her hair, her few strands of hair, and place flowers near her bed. He looked at me and said, "Thanks for making my kids able to see their mommy as they remembered her." And upon meeting a new patient, an elderly woman, small and frail, I was preparing to explain how I could assist her. Before I could begin my presentation, she lifted her hand slightly and then spoke clearly. "So, you are to be my warrior?" I'm sure you've all had moments like that. I began the helper's journey with these words by George Bernard Shaw. "This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being thoroughly worn out before you're thrown on the scrap heap, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish little selfish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." Think about your efforts, all your helping as rippling across generations. That daughter who sees you caring for her mother so lovingly with such grace and skill will become the next great nurse or physician or social worker. The children you help say goodbye to their beloved parent will remember that moment on their own deathbeds and bring their family together to say their own goodbyes. You are changing our culture. You're changing how we die and how we live. It will go on and on, long after we leave this place we call home. That's your legacy, and maybe that's where hope truly resides. Compassion and caring are at the core of being human. This is the inner light, the splendid torch you have in your hands and can pass on to future generations. With this torch, you bring light and when it's dark and warmth when it's cold. So make the most of this time here with kindred spirits and who share in the journey. And as I like to say, sally forth, which the dictionary reminds me means to leave a safe place in a brave or confident way in order to do something difficult. Thank you for our time together in this safe place, and thank you for all that you do. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.